Happy Friday. It is Friday, um, May 23rd, 2025. And we're here again for another episode of $5 in the World. That's the name of the book project I'm working on based on stories and experiences and sayings that my dad had when he was growing up and through his whole life. And I just want to share them with you. I want to write a book that encapsulates those and tries to capture the spirit of the guy and what he imparted to people like me and my brother and my wife and my kids and everyone he came into contact with. He had a joy for life. He had an approach to life that made him, you know, led to a fulfilling life. One of the things he said to us, and I'll probably write about, I know I'll write about this later. One of the things he said to us towards the end of his life, he lived, as I've said before, he lived 101 years from May 26th, 1916 to February 17th, 2017. Um, he lived a full life, and he at the end he looked at each one of us. We were able to talk to him until a few days before he died, where he was pretty much unconscious then. But up until then, some of the last things we talked about is he had no regrets. 101 years, no regrets. It's because he had a forward lean to his life. He knew if there was a mistake, you could make amends, you could make adjustments, you could move on. If you did something wrong, you could ask for forgiveness. You could seek reconciliation. There are ways to deal with anything that came along. Business failings, business growth. People are born, people die. Everything that a person can experience, he did more than once. And yet, at the end of all of that, no regrets. That's a life goal I have, and I hope it's something that you aspire to as well, to live fully and to love deeply and to try new things. This chapter, I shortened it to "Who Can Say Yes," and what this is about really is what do you do, who do you hang out with, and who do you talk to, and how do you get help when you have a problem or an issue that you don't know what to do or don't know how to do something about it. Um, there's an old expression, misery loves company. And what I get from that is if I'm having a bad day and I start talking about I'm having a bad day, and then you decide you're having a bad day too, and someone else comes along and decides, yeah, my day's pretty bad too, we kind of reinforce one another's sense of a bad day or a bad experience. And we draw some kind of comfort from knowing we're all suffering together, and there's a place for that. I'm not saying that sometimes we just want to commiserate, and there is some benefit to that. Not every conversation has to be about a solution. Okay. But on the other hand, if I'm talking to you about a problem I have and you're talking to me about a problem you have, and neither one of us has the inclination or the ability or the resources to help each other out with it, then at some point it goes beyond it, and at some point it'll go beyond commiserating and connecting and just turn into just that misery loving company. You can kind of settle into that spirit of misery and just kind of park it there and just figure if they're suffering and I'm suffering, then that's normal and I should just get used to it. It's that loss of incentive, that loss of motivation to take a situation and do what I can with what I have to make it different. When I lose that, you really do get that sensation of being stuck. And if it lasts long enough, you can end up in things like despair and resentment and depression and just frustration. It doesn't have to be like that. And so my dad had a philosophy about, when you're talking about a problem, when you have an issue, talk to people that can do something about it. He, you don't want to be in that position where every time you get together with your friends for coffee or beer or whatever, or you're at the office during a break, and every time you're together, everyone just collects around the negativity and just feeds off it from each other. That's not going to that's not going to change the narrative. That's not going to change the trajectory. And at some point, it's going to lead to less. possibility. It's going to drain us of that energy that we need to do the things that we really would like to do. And so I want to see what you think of how he handled these things. I want to see what you think of his sayings. I want to hear if you think it's realistic to approach problems this way and to always be on with this mindset. Because I know sometimes it just feels better just kind of curl up in a ball and kind of suffer for a while. And there is some room for mourning. I'm not talking about mourning. I'm talking about or feeling bad about a tragedy and things like that. What I'm talking about is that just I don't like say someone doesn't like their job or they don't like the state of their health or they don't like their income or they don't like the relationship they have with someone in their life and every time they talk about it, they're talking to somebody that doesn't have any influence or impact on the situation, and they don't have any advice and they don't have any experience to make it better. It just really is just airing the grievances. And again, there's some room for that. Like in the chapter on the 90-10 rule, Dad acknowledged there's 10% of our time, again, give or take, can be acknowledging, hey, there's an issue, there's a problem, there's a thing, there's something wrong. It's not pretending like everything's fine all the time. Actually, it's the opposite. It's like acknowledging things aren't going to be fine all the time. What are we going to do to make it more fine? Um, but we can get into we can fall into circles and groups where really the whole point of the exercise is kind of see who's worse off and reaffirm with one another it's fine to be worse off. That's just the way it is, and we should just that's the way those are the cards we were dealt. That's the life I was born into. That's just the way I am. That's how I was raised. Those kind of like fatalistic approaches to things. Like I kind of like Popeye the Sailor. If you remember that cartoon, he used to say, "I am what I am, and that's all that I am." There's a certain kind of self confidence in that, but there's also a certain kind of resignation. Like that's I'm not changing, and I just don't think at the end of the day that's a philosophy I want to live by. But let's take a look at this. Let me read what I wrote, and I'd love your feedback as always. Who can say yes? In another chapter, I wrote about Dad's attitude regarding problem solving. Take enough time to clearly define a problem and then shift the focus to possible solutions. He did not ruminate on his problems and issues. He considered and applied solutions until he got results that made things better. There was another element of problem solving that he mastered. He did not hesitate to find help, look for advice, and study what others had done in similar situations. In the midst of trouble, we have a tendency to feel isolated and alone. It's possible you've been brought up to handle things on your own. Maybe you believe that nobody cares about your issues. On one level, it is true. Most people do not care all that much about people outside of their inner circle. Not everybody you know is close enough to you to engage in your challenges, or they might not be capable of helping. They lack the knowledge or the means or the authority to do anything for you. My dad was used to hearing people talk about their problems to just about anybody willing to sit and listen. He saw people in a kind of misery auction, one upping each other with details of the difficulties. The thing that struck him was the level of it. The thing that struck him was the level of disinterest in finding any perspective or solution. Oftentimes, these conversations would be done in peer to peer groups. Everybody in the conversation had the same mindset and lack of capability to resolve the issue. My dad was aware of the dynamic here because when you work in sales, as he did it most of his life, it is a popular way to pass the time amongst salespeople when there isn't a customer on site. Salespeople congregate and talk about all of the reasons that business is slow, the reason that people aren't buying the particular product, why the market is in lousy shape. It can move on to personal issues caused by this unfair market, the employer, or some other external culprit. He observed it all the time, and there was a time in his life when he engaged in the gripe sessions himself. People that spend a lot of time drinking and socializing take on these habits of thinking as well. A big part of the reason he drank so much was to obscure the degree of his problems and shortcomings. Misery really does love company. This capacity for fixating on commiserating about problems instead of solving them is not confined to saloons and sales offices. It is part of the human condition. It is part of the human condition. We need to be students of trouble to learn about dangers and risks to avoid. There is some comfort to be had in just being heard. It is reassuring to know that I'm not the only one dealing with stuff. The risk to our peace of mind and good fortune is if we do not pivot from this communing with fellow sufferers to look for people who can help make the changes desired. Unresolved problems, complaints, and affirmation of these complaints will start to build resentments and grievances in us. This can also lead to a sense of stagnation or disillusionment. We suffer when we feel like there's nothing that can be done, that nobody can help. The 90-10 rule helps us push back against this sort of angst. The other key rule my dad taught us: when you have a problem, make sure you talk to people that can do something about it. Find the person who can say yes. He understood that spending a lot of time and energy talking about an issue with people that couldn't or wouldn't help just made a bad situation worse. He believed that there was always somebody that can help with finding or creating the solution. If it's an employment issue, don't talk to coworkers, talk to the person that can make a change. If it's a life partner, don't complain about them. Have a talk with the one person who can make a difference, your partner. This doesn't preclude seeking advice because, after all, good advice is helping with the solution. In life, many of our problems can be addressed by gaining access to the person who can make a decision in our favor. Finding the decision maker is what Dad meant by telling us to find the person who can say yes. He told us that most people are trained to say no: the gatekeepers, the public facing staff members, the middle managers. He advised against getting mad with people that are just doing what they're paid to do. Use the energy anger would generate to find out how to reach the person that can say yes. He did not teach us that finding the decision maker would guarantee success. He did teach us that success was a lot farther away if we didn't find this resource. It isn't always easy to achieve this interaction, but until we do, we shouldn't give up on gaining the outcome we desire. Focusing our attention on people that can help us in some way keeps us out of most gossip and slander sessions. When people are frustrated with a situation or person, that's an environment for lashing out at and tearing people down or tearing down the institutions. We can get so caught up in how unsatisfied we are that we lose perspective and motivation. Looking for solutions for people that can help keeps us motivated and maintains hope. If it's true that birds of a feather flock together, then choose wisely which ones you gather with. I believe his sense that there is always somebody who could help came from experience and his own thinking. He was willing to help others when he could. He found joy in it. He was not a naive person. He did not believe everybody would be an ally. He just knew that somebody could. It was his responsibility and opportunity to find those kinds of people. We have the same choices to make about who we associate with, how we manage our struggles, and how we choose to engage with others during theirs. Find the person that can help. Be the person willing to help when you can. Find the person that can say yes. Do not abuse the people that say no. They might not have much choice. As people of faith understand, there is always one that has the authority to say yes, and it is wise to seek him. For those that don't believe in a higher power, the principle remains that the most effective way out of a problem is to find the one who can say yes to our request, or to find the one with the best advice, or the one that can show us how to do the thing we need to do, or the one that lends a hand to our efforts. When you have a problem, talk to the ones that can do something about it and see the changes happen that you desire. I learned a lot from that teaching when I was growing up, especially once I got into business. There was a time where it was particularly crucial for me. Um, we owned a company for a while, and there was a sales tax obligation involved. We were selling things, we had to collect sales tax, then pay the sales tax off to the state, which we did. But on occasion, the tax payments would be late. We had there was a window of time it had to be turned in by, and sometimes it would arrive late, but we paid it all. At the time we closed our business, we owed the state $0. But somebody, and I don't know who to this day who did it, but somebody filed a complaint with the Michigan State Treasury that we had paid our sales tax late from time to time. So they looked into it, and yes, they did find that we had paid them late from time to time. And so even though our business was closed, because I was the president of the company, I was personally liable for the late tax, which there was zero, but there were penalties, and then there was interest, and they were like really, really high, and it got to the point where they decided that even though we owed zero taxes because we'd paid late sometimes, there were fees, and then those fees accrued interest. All long story short, we I got a letter from the state treasury that said I personally owed $45,000 on behalf of the company for this tax penalty and the interest that went with it. I was blown away because I kept thinking we owe zero tax. How can I owe $45,000 for zero tax? So I called the treasuries, and I got the person who answers the phone. They directed me to customer service. I talked to them, and they said, "Yeah, that sounds about right. I'll make a note in the file." And it would go away for a little while. Then every once in a while, this letter would show up again, and it was getting pretty serious. And so I would call, and I would get the same kind of low level, entry level person, talk through it. They said, "Yeah, that makes sense. We'll make a note in the file." But then the letters would come, and this went on for quite a while, over a year. And so I finally decided, well, let me find someone who can help me with this. Maybe I'm not talking to the right people. So I found a tax attorney here in Grand Rapids, and in his bio, he said he specialized in state sales tax issues. So I thought that's the perfect guy. So I go and I talk to him and I lay out our case and I show him the records and explain the situation. He says, that sounds very reasonable. I'll go talk to somebody at Treasury and I'll smooth this over. I pay him a retainer fee. And after a little while, he comes back, he goes, I can't get anything done. They insist that you have to pay it. You're just going to have to make a payment arrangement. It's not going to go away. And I said, that's unacceptable. I thanked him for his service and I thought about it some more. I thought, who else do I know that can help me with this? Well, the mayor of Kentwood moved on after he was lived down the street, not that far from us, in a humble, a modest house just down the road from us. And we would bump into him in the neighborhood. And then I would go to I was a supporter of his. So I would see him at public speaking events and things like that. We knew him casually. We weren't best buds or anything, but I knew him casually. Well, after he was mayor of Kentwood, he became a state senator. And I thought, well, state senators and state reps, they have an office of constituent assistance. And I'm going to call them and I'm going to see if they can help me with Treasury. So I call the office and I get a really nice guy. And I said, look, I'm not asking you to intervene on my behalf. That's not appropriate. You don't know my situation. What I am asking for is access. And he said, what do you mean? And I said, I want to talk to somebody at Treasury that has the authority to say yes. Just literally what my dad told us to look for. That's what I asked for. Because I said, once somebody who can make a decision understands the situation, that is not unpaid tax that they're trying to collect. It's a penalty that accrued, doubled and tripled over time, and then just had interest tacked on top of it. It's a penalty for not doing, it's penalty and stuff for taxes we actually paid. I'm convinced once I talk to somebody that could understand it, they'll let me go. So he said, well, we'll see what we can do. We don't do much with Treasury, but I'll make a call. Within a week, I got a phone call from a guy at Treasury. And he said, I understand you'd like to have a meeting. I said, I would love to have a meeting. I just want to show you what's going on and see if you can help me. Because I just think there's a disconnect here. So we set a date. I drove to Lansing and we met at Treasury, and there was a small little cubbyhole office, like a little conference room. It was me, the guy, and one of his assistants, probably just as a witness or to transcribe what we talked about. I had a 3-ring binder. I had all the records and the notices and all the things, and I explained the dynamics and the scenario. And when these notices started coming, and he read through it all, he pulled my sheet, and this is what he said. He said, if this had gotten to my desk sooner, I would have killed it in the first place. This never should have happened. State law will not allow me to waive the interest, but I can waive all the penalties and fees, and I'm going to do that. That means instead of owing $45,000, you owe like $3,500. I wish I could waive that too, but I just can't. But I'll let you make small payments on it so it doesn't mess up. It won't be a problem for you. Is that okay? I said, yeah, that'll work. And that's the deal we ended up. So I went from owing 45,000 with nobody with a solution and no resolution for it to getting it down to under $4,000. And I paid it off over a handful of months, and it cleared. It went away, and it was literally because this coaching I got from my dad all the time I was growing up. So when you got a problem like that, find somebody who can make a decision. Because everyone else I talked to before that happened were paid to say no. They didn't have the authority. In other words, even if they agreed with me, they didn't have the authority to do anything about it. I finally found a guy with the help of the state senator to help me, and I only got that because I took a chance. It seemed like a crazy thing to do, to call a state senator and ask him for help with something, but they say they want you to. And that was the other thing. My dad was always saying, find someone who will help you. There's always somebody that wants to help. There's always somebody that wants to be the hero. Let them be one. And after it all turned out. And I'm just so thankful for that kind of lesson. There's other stories like that in my life, and I bet if you think about it, you've got some too, where you just realize, I'm just talking to the same people over and over and not getting anywhere. There's got to be a different way to approach this thing. Um, so I give that to you to think about, and I hope that it gives you a different way to look at situations. Maybe even evaluate your peer group. I'm sure you all have really cool friends, but maybe the friends are good to listen to your situation and commiserate with you and give you support and encouragement. But maybe they're not the ones that can help with the problem itself. So always evaluate that. I was talking to my daughter yesterday, and she's on a sports team and a league team, and she says, she loves everybody on her team, but not everybody's the same, right? Just like everybody's different. She's like, some of her friends, she talks about certain things, and other friends, she talks to them about other things, but they don't really mix and match because some friends are better at keeping secrets than others. Some people have more life experience, so they've got a little better advice on different things than others, right? You got to know your tribe, know your circle, know your group. And if you have to go outside of it to get something done, then go ahead. But watch out for the chronic complaining in others or in yourself. Watch out for the people who are always the experts on why no new idea will work, why nothing's ever going to be okay, why it's just the way it is. It is what it is. That expression's true sometimes, but a lot of times it's not. A lot of times it is what it is, but it doesn't have to be that way. That's kind of the second half of it. So always be wise about that. Look at your situations. I have to look at mine and go, how many of these things are this way because of something I'm doing or not doing? How many of these things could be changed if I want them to change, if I get the right kind of help? Anyways, that's my story. Find out who can say yes and then see the kind of amazing things that can happen. Thanks for being here. Like, share, invite others to subscribe. I would love to get this to circulate as much as possible because the more input I get, the better. And I'm just really grateful that you take the time to watch these either live or in replay. And eventually, I'm going to post this out into the wider, you know, social media space. But for now, it's just a relatively small group from our Bible study that I post this to. Others can catch it and find it, and I'm so glad we do. That's it for today. I'll see you next time when we look at another story from $5 in the world. All right, bye for now. See you next week.